Get a professional look sewing your stretch waistband to your pants directly. You can skip the drawcord or the top stitching. You can use a straight stitch, a serger, or a zigzag. Your waistband will stretch, no problem, and you'll get a really nice finish. Let's do it. Your pants are assembled and you're ready to attach your waistband. This is what we're going to do to set up our pieces for success. Before you cut your elastic, make sure you stretch it a few times before you cut it to the length that you want. I also recommend making it a tad smaller than your finished circumference if you plan on stitching through your waistband, maybe to create a drawcord channel, or just to stitch through it if you will like that look. I've pieced my elastic here since I didn't have a large enough piece. When I'm ready to attach it into a circle, I usually overlap it flat, and then I'm going to put 2 parallel rows here. Don't just put one. You can do zigzags, you can do straight stitch, whatever you like, but make sure that you stitch it really securely so that when you're pulling on it, it's not going to come undone. I'm overlapping it about 3/4 of an inch. I know the black is a little hard to see. So looking just like that. For my waistband, I'm using a piece of rib. It does not need to be rib to be a waistband. I could use all kinds of fabrics. You could even use whatever your pants are made from. I've added eyelets for drawcord holes. You could use buttonholes. You don't have to have a drawcord, and you don't have to stitch through the waist. It just depends on if you like that look or you're having a drawcord. I'm using the notches on the pattern here. You can kind of see I cut them out so you could see them. But if you don't have notches on your waistband piece, I'm going to remind you before we attach it to make sure that it's divided into quarters or into sections that will match your waist that are the same percentage. So maybe your front is smaller than your back. We wouldn't want to put our waistband in quarters then. We want to match the sections. Hopefully in that case, you've got notches to go by. Now this particular waistband wasn't set up to have elastic sewn to the waistband as like a whole unit like we're doing today. So I had to cut down the waistband to fit. The formula that I use is twice my elastic and then a tiny bit more, like a little less than 1/8 of an inch or 3 millimeters for the thickness of your elastic. If you're using thicker elastic than me, you're going to want to test this. So I would wrap it around, use your fabric and your elastic to figure out this measurement from here around to the other side. And then I would cut my waistband that width. Don't add a lot of extra. Make sure that you have it just what you need because you don't want to have to worry about this fabric hanging past the elastic. It'll add too much fiddliness for when we attach it with the overlock or the zigzag. Now lastly, this is kind of a little future gift to yourself if you like. You can draw the channels if you plan on top stitching through your waist. You can draw them on, and I would do it now while this is a nice flat piece, and you can use a grid ruler to make parallel lines. Now what I did here is instead of thirds, I prioritized my drawcord opening here, especially because I have the eyelets and I don't want to sew through those by accident. If I'd done thirds, it would have put one of these lines a little too close to the bottom of the eyelet. So I centered my channel over the eyelet, and that's going to be the sectioning that I'm going to use on this particular waistband. And I just used a little bit of chalk for that. You can probably barely see it. So now we're going to sew our waistband right sides together, and you can use whatever machine and stitch you like for this. This is going to get so securely sewn in, it's not going to matter and it doesn't need to stretch. So I'm just going to use my straight stitch machine and sew it at the seam allowance for this pattern piece. And then I'm going to press this open to make it nice and flat. If you have a serger, what you can do is put a few straight stitches at the fold line of your waistband here and then clip your waistband seam allowance, and then you can offset them like this. But make sure you put a few stitches right there. Don't rely on your serger if you've cut through the stitching to hold that seam anymore. It just depends on what kind of serger stitch you're using. Next, we're going to section our elastic. So we want to put this into quarters. So the first thing I'm going to do is find 2 centers, and you can use your seam if you like, but it can be a little bit hard sometimes to bend those to find your center. So now I will stack these 2 centers on top of each other to find my other quarter. I think the easiest thing to do if your fronts are differently sized than your backs is to find the quarters on your waistline. You can do this exact same thing on your waistline. Maybe the quarters don't line up to your side seam, but you can just put a little notch on your pants where that quarter mark is. So don't think of any of the seams as being quarter marks except your center front and center back. And then you can add a halfway point between center front and center back along the side of your pants to indicate where the quarter is. Now this part is probably going to be the fiddliest part of the whole process. The sewing is actually pretty easy. It's just getting this set up because we don't have a special machine like they do in ready to wear or in factories. So what we want to do is start lining up our quarters on our waistband here. So I'm going to put, let's see, we're going to put this one here at the center back. If you want to offset your seams, you could always put that at the side instead, like this. So we'll put this here, and then I'm going to use clips to hold things in place. Okay, so now we're going to attach all of our other quarter marks. So now I'm just making sure that nothing is flipped here. We'll find our other quarter mark here. It'll feel a little fiddly, so just focus on your quarters and get each one pinned. All right, we'll double check it, make sure everything looks like it's not twisted. There we go. And so now you have a couple of options here. Now, if you're not planning on putting any stitching through your waistband, you can just stitch this edge to your elastic and kind of pre-stitch it before you get to the final step of attaching it to the waist of your pants. If you plan on adding a drawcord or channels, you can either stitch these rows now or you can stitch them after it's attached to the pants. And I kind of waffle between these two. I think each one has their fiddliness. It just depends on what you're willing to deal with. My drawcord is going to be really hard to get through my eyelets, so for me it would benefit me to insert my drawcord right now and then deal with the fiddliness of managing the drawcord. All right, so here's my drawcord, and I'm going to insert it in the holes. There we go. And now wrap. I'm going to drop it in here and repin my quarters. And now we're back around to the front, and we'll stick this other one through. Now I could knot my drawcord so that it doesn't slide out right now. I made my drawcord, but if you're using like a regular drawcord, probably look a little different. Okay, so now I'm going to pull on my drawcord and get most of it out here and kind of the same circumference here. I'm going to tie these out of the way. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to stitch around the bottom. And if you're not doing the channels, you want to do this step before you attach to the waistband. It makes it a little easier. You don't have to, but it will make it a lot easier and less to manage when you get to that step. So whether you're adding the top stitch channels down the middle or you're not, everybody can do this next step since it'll make the final step a lot easier and less fussy. And all we're going to do is we're going to stitch through all of our layers along this bottom edge here. And this will be the last time it's super, super fiddly. This is going to set us up for success. So I'm going to start at the center back here, and I'm just going to use my regular straight stitch machine. And that's because, like I said before, this waistband is a much larger circumference. The elastic is the finished circumference. So when I'm stretching this to match the lengths of one another, I'm going to be stretching the elastic to match that larger circumference. When I stitch through it, the stitching is going to be at the longest and biggest circumference, and then when I let go, it's going to snap into and scrunch together. So this is why I can use my straight stitch machine. You can use a zigzag if you like, but it's not necessary. And we're going to be stitching in the seam allowance of this edge here. A couple of really helpful tips for your machine. If you're going to adjust the pressure of your presser foot and make it really firm, this will make this step a lot easier. The other thing is always stopping with your needle down as you adjust. Lastly, you've probably heard me say this before, when you're sewing something and you're stretching it as you sew, you can't stretch it after you've started sewing. You can hold it stretched while you're sewing, but you can't start sewing and then pull on it as it's going through the machine. I know that seems kind of obvious, but it is sometimes your hands will sort of betray you in this. So what you want to do is find your quarters, and I'm going to hold behind as well. I'm just going to find a little spot. I'm going to pull this and stretch it, and then I'm going to start sewing. And like I said, this is going to be a little fiddly because it's going to want to see how it wants to pull away from the waist. So if you want, I could go through and kind of line up this and put a clip at the top, and that'll make it a little easier. So again, here I can Just stretch it, I'll gently stretch it, and put a clip at the top. And it'll sort of help seat it onto the elastic. And yes, the draw cord will be something I'm going to have to manage, and I just haven't mentioned it yet. Okay, we'll wait for that one when we get closer. All right, so here we go. This is kind of nice because now I have this sort of to guarantee hold on to. And so like I said, we're going to stretch, and I can feel my draw cord in there, so I'm just making sure it's staying up out of the way. Okay, I'm gonna get my layers back here sort of lined up too. I'm gonna stretch this and sew. Now I'm not grabbing the draw cord. It's in there and yeah, it's between my fingers, but I don't want the draw cord to hinder me pulling and stretching this. So we're gonna stretch this. So, and then when we take a break and we relax, we're not sewing, and now we're going to stretch it again and then sew. You might be able to do just little bits at a time. Like I said, this is going to be the fussiest it gets, and then it'll get easier. Brought the camera in here. So again, I'm going to hold it back here, stretch. Don't want this to pull too far away. Get the draw cord up there. Notice how my needle always stops down, presser foot's down, and I use that to my advantage to sort of hold things kind of like a third hand because it holds it really firmly. And you adjust this draw cord a little bit since it's not letting it do what it needs to do. Don't worry about stretching this a lot because this is just a basting stitch. We're going to put a nice stretchy stitch in it at the end. Prioritize trying to get all these layers lined up along this edge right here. Because even though I'm not stretching a whole lot, you see how it still stretches? And you see I was just about to get off there, so we'll just take these out. Probably happened because of my notch, so we'll just take that out there. Get this back on track. We only need to stretch it so that it fits in here. There we go. All right, we take our clips out. Now that was, in my opinion, the hardest step. All right, so let's sort of make sure my elastic or my draw cord is not letting me stretch it very much, but here we'll undo this. Check it out. There we go. All right. So now we have our waistband ready to go. If you inserted your draw cord ahead of time like I did, I'm going to put a few pins sort of to keep the draw cord up and out of the way of the serger. Just so we don't have to worry about it. We'll just put a few. We may have to remove them along the way, but at least then we'll know that it's out of the way. So we'll just get it so that we know we're not going to accidentally catch it. All right, so now you can stitch your channels if you like right now. I'll do it afterwards just so that we can get through the tutorial and we'll come back to that. All right, now it's time for the best part. We're going to attach our waistband to our pants. So you can see here are my pants. They're inside out right now. I have pockets right here that go to the waist. I have side seams and front and back seams. So I only have 4 seams, basically. You might have more. And if you want to add a label to your waist seam, now's probably the time to tack it in here and have it ready. Now, if you don't think your fronts are the same width as your back, mine are, you can kind of see, what you can do is line up your centers like this, just stack them one on top of the other, flatten out your pant, and then find where that other quarter is. So maybe it would look more like this. You could put a little notch right here, and then you'd have the quarter, and then your waistband will match this if you quartered the waistband. All right, so here we have this. I'm gonna put my back down. We're gonna keep the pant inside out. We're gonna put our waistband right sides together. So here's my center front, so it would go to the front here. We're going to clip these in place so that our quarters are matching. All right, now we're ready. And we're going to be doing the same thing we did before where we stretched and sewed, but this time we don't have to manage all these layers. We only have to manage this one to this one. And if you want to add more clips, you can stretch it into place and sort of find where you can clip in another place. It is a little tricky, I admit it. Stretching it into place, and then I can walk my hands just like that and add more clips in between. You need to know where your landmarks are, those quarter marks, because you have to be on track by the time you get to each of those quarters. So now here we can test this, and that works pretty good, right? So if you want to add more clips, go for it. So we're going to start at the back, And you notice that my pant is inside out and the back here is on the base of the machine here, so that the whole pant is above the serger. We have no danger of the pant slipping under the serger unless we don't manage the pant. But right now, it's all up, so we don't have to worry about it slipping under. Now, I recommend that you have something to set the weight of your pant on your table so that it's not pulling on the machine. You don't want to have to worry about managing anything but what you're sewing. Now, if you want to use a zigzag, you can totally do that. And I'll put a recommendation for the width and the length on the screen. Something that you like, something that is roughly 1/4 inch wide or 6 millimeters, just something to sort of flatten these thicknesses down. But remember, we're stretching this, then sewing it, so it's going to be stretchy no matter what stitch that you use. But the zigzag would give it a really nice finishing look. You don't have to have a serger. All right, so here's my back. We're going to start sort of behind it. This is probably a little bit of an awkward spot because it's a little hard to start stretching when it's not even under the needle yet. So we'll just get it going. So all I'm trying to do right now is just get it on, like this is like the on-ramp. Now my serger is set up, it's a 4-thread serger, and it's set up for basic construction stitches. I don't have any of the differential on. I'm just sewing a regular 4-thread stitch, and I made sure the tension of all the threads look good for the thickness of my project. So the problem with my fabric is it rolls, and yours might too. Try and get all these threads, you know, like this one here, to the seam allowance here so we can trim it and get rid of it. All right, and remember, stretch, then sew. I'm not trimming anything off because we want the full width of the elastic. It's okay if you do, but you don't need to. All right, so we're gonna get this a little closer to the length. Stretch, sew. Sometimes people like to drop their knife if they have that capability. I don't personally like the way it looks with dropping the knife, so I always leave my knife, and I don't mind if it trims a little bit. This doesn't bug me. So you can kind of see I have this little bubble there, and that's because that's still stretching right there. You see that? This is not stretched, and this is stretched. So we still have to make it to our landmark. Don't take that clip off until you know you're going to hit that point. And then if it snaps that way, you know you're going to need to pull it to line up. So here's my seam right here, and my notch is it's right here. So we're going to pull this. See how the notch just appeared right there? Maybe you can see. So it lands on the seam. Remember, we're only doing that when the machine's not moving. And then once it's moving, we're holding it still in whatever position that we want it. Now here's my draw cord right here. So we're going to make sure that we push that away. You just need to worry about a few inches at a time. Looking that there's just some of these threads. This fabric is particularly weird and obviously very loopy, so it wants to put threads onto my seam there. Now's a good time to adjust your pants. They may be twisting and it'll start creating tension. So just make sure that you get the whole pant on top of your table and it's not twisting and pulling on your project here. But it's looking really good. All right, we're almost to the beginning here. So be careful of this weird little loop that you can kind of get because it wants to blump over like that. So you want to make sure that you're stretching it and making sure that you're lining it up to the stitching. I don't want to trim any of this already sewn stitches here. So we're going to try and just trim right here, this tiny little bit where I went on, and then line up our blade just outside of that edge. All right, I'm gonna leave a little tail, and then what I'll do is pull it to the inside of the pant and tack it into the seam allowance there to kind of secure it. All right, so give it a look over, see if everything got caught, tug it everywhere, make sure that you didn't miss any layers. Okay, and if you don't plan on top stitching your waistband, you're done, good job. And as another finishing thing, you can stitch your waistband to the pant if you want to flatten it out. And it's the same idea. You're gonna stretch and then sew that seam allowance to the pant just to kind of flatten it out if you don't want it to be kind of bubbly there. Depends on what fabric you're using. Some fabrics you might get a little nervous stitching through those thicknesses and the elastic, but in a lot of cases you might find that it makes it lay a little nicer. You know, when you're stretching it, usually it'll flatten it out really good, and you can always use a hammer to kind of mash it down a little bit before you sew it, and that really does compress the seam allowances. And good job. All right, so now we're going to top stitch the waistband as our final steps. So our last step is to top stitch our channels on our waistband, if you plan on doing that. And it's just more of the same. We're gonna stretch and sew as we do this, and having this blue line will help me. I'm not the straightest sewer, so this is gonna help me. I've never added a chalk line for myself, so I'm eager to see how much better I do. I wanna add my top row first. So we're gonna let that draw cord slip to the bottom here, out of the way. I'm gonna pull the slack of my draw cord. That'll help me position it a little better. And we're gonna pull it down. If you didn't add your draw cord yet, I would do it after you add your rows of top stitching. It's a lot easier if you use a buttonhole because you can still get a safety pin through the opening there, whereas I can't with the eyelets. All right, so we're gonna start at center back, and let's just tack our tail right now so we don't forget. So we're gonna pull it pretty firmly, and sometimes I get these little loops like this, and what I do with that is I will trim it a little bit closer. I still leave myself a tail, and then I just pull on these, and I'm looking for the one that's gonna help me cinch up those loops there. Sometimes I find it, sometimes I don't. It's this one right here. I tighten them up, and then I make this tail into something that I can top stitch down into the seam allowance there. And then I trim them closer. Now, if you didn't mark your waistband and you wanna top stitch it, another method to do nice even rows is to add a piece of tape, and don't just add a tiny little piece on your throat plate. Add it so that it's along the entire bed of the machine, and then that way what you can do is line up your waistband to where you want that stitching to be, put the tape there, and then if you keep your waistband lined up from top to bottom, it'll keep it nice and parallel for that whole stitching. We're gonna start at center back, and again, we're going to stretch and sew. We're gonna stop needle down. We want nice firm pressure on our presser foot, and we're gonna go all the way around. If you have a chain stitch on your cover stitch, this would be a fun thing to use it for, and good practice for it. And you can also do a zigzag as well. You can do whatever stitch you want here. Like I said, we're stretching it to the fullest amount. It's gonna scrunch back up, so it doesn't matter. This is a lot easier than all the other things we've done. It's just more visible. And now the next one's going to be even easier since we've already stabilized this. But if you're managing a draw cord in there, it does add a layer of something to manage. So now I'm going to try and slide my draw cord up into this channel I'm about to sew. I find that if I pull the draw cord, it'll want to go to the top end here. All right, so now we just need to make sure we don't stitch through it. You could pin your draw cord out of the way. I just think that that will be just as fussy as sewing it very slowly. So you could just sew slowly and then manage your draw cord that way. Okay, same idea. Stretch, then sew. And we want parallel as best we can. I'm always arranging the pants so that they're not going to pull and make it harder for me. I'm also trying to clear it away so you can see really well, but you don't have to spend all that time doing that. And again, you can tell, like, I like sewing with my pants above the bed of the machine. I don't have a free arm, which means that this hook could go around the bed of the machine. And I find that this is a lot safer, that I don't catch anything that'll slip under the needle below the pants. I do think adding the chalk helped me stay a little straighter. All right, so give it a few good tugs. That looks really good. You did a good job. All right, so we have now a very secure waistband. And like I said earlier, if you wanted to mash down this thickness, you can top stitch it to the pant. So I'm gonna try that here just as an experiment. You're gonna be a definite pro of stretching and sewing after doing this. So I'm just gonna really keep it taut. And I'm just going to line my presser foot up to the seam, or close. All right, well, now you have a very professional looking waistband, and I hope that you enjoy sewing all your waistbands like this when you get the chance. Happy sewing!